Welcome back, everybody, to His Heartbeat. And I have a lovely guest, Cheryl Kincaid. Welcome to our show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, she has quite the story. And of course, we want to hear about that. But before we do, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Cheryl Kincaid. I'm a Presbyterian minister, and at the heartbeat of myself is knowing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior.
Mm.
But I came from an abusive home. I was that was also steeped in poverty, and so climbing out of that hole has taken me a lifetime to do that.
Mm.
And I, along the way, have been able to get some training, facilitated support groups for survivors of incest and rape. From there, I went to seminary, and I worked with foster care. I also worked with girls in group homes.
Mm.
And once I became a minister, I felt the need still to stay within this work. And so I've always written, but that's when I sought to be published, and got my books published. The first one was Hearing the Gospel Through Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which talks about child abuse in the Victorian England, and the correlation it had to do with Christians' responsibility. But the other one, Carrie's Thorn and A Forgotten Door Called Home, are just stories about two Christian girls stuck in foster care and how they manage and maneuver their faith and their education and their crushes, trying to figure out how to work the system.
Mm. So, are you helping a lot of girls or boys, I don't know, who are in the foster care system?
Well, I worked at a group home for 2 years, and I had foster kids myself.
Mm.
And as a little girl, I was in foster care for 1 year. Um, but we didn't stay there. We went back home to live with my grandma and my mom. But so I understood, but my groups I facilitated support groups called Outgrowing the Pain for survivors of incest. Many of the kids had been in foster care. And
Mm.
um, one of the complaints that we heard often is that everyone assumed whenever you portrayed these kids that yes, they need Jesus, but any Christian movie would be about them accepting Christ as if they began as non-Christians. And
Mm.
what about Christians who are in there and are just trying to find a way out and find a way to get an education and get a decent job and have a normal relationship with a man? And that's what Carrie's thorn is about. And the
Mm.
thorn is alluding to the Apostle Paul's thorn in the flesh, because his scars don't leave her just because she's a Christian.
Yeah.
She has to
Amen.
struggle with it her whole life. And I put in the book purposefully some Christian friends who would come alongside of her. I also put some people who didn't understand her too, because I wanted to portray both those sides. You know, the church isn't a monolith. It's not one person. It's made up of many people.
Right.
And some people have some very sexist, very cruel assumptions about survivors of sexual abuse. And
Mm.
some people are very accepting and healing and empowering. And so I
Mm.
wanted both those sides to be within the book.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just that you can bring yourself into that as well. You understand, you bring the emotions and the realities of that. Can you share a little bit, well, from your own story first? Like, how did you get yourself out of that? Did you call it a pit, or was that when we were talking earlier? Yeah.
It was pretty much a hole that I found myself in. So when I was a little girl, my one of my abusers called his abuse love. And I'd gone to Sunday school and heard the story of the prodigal son.
Mm.
And it was one of those, I don't know if you've ever seen a chalk drawing, but they're very effective in child evangelism. You draw one drawing in regular chalk, and then you draw another drawing behind it in fluorescent chalk. And then as you tell the story at a certain part, you turn on the fluorescent lights, and something that
Mm.
can't be seen is suddenly seen.
Oh, wow.
So, in the prodigal son, there was this boy stuck in this pig's pen, as they told the story. And then they said, little did he know the father was watching him all along. And they turned on the lights, and there was the father with his hands over the child. Beautiful story, well told. But unfortunately, I took it the wrong way.
Mm.
I thought it meant if I go to heaven, I won't be in this pig's blood anymore.
Mm.
So I decided one night, during a fight between my parents, I'd take my life. And I was only 6. I went to a window, tried to throw myself off, couldn't do it. Went back to bed, tried the second time, couldn't do it. The third time when I tried to get up, I felt a warm hand on my stomach and heard a voice say, God is love.
Mm.
And that dictated my life pretty much. Now, I still had learning disabilities. I still had trauma from poverty. I still was horribly bullied at school because I had been abused, and children who are often abused are abused at school as well. I had at different times, and I put this in Carrie Thorne's, teachers who would stand up for me, and
Mm.
youth leaders who would stand up for me. And I had both in the church people who said, oh, she's from that trash heap, she'll always be that way, and people who went out of their way to give me wonderful things in my life. One man gave up, it was a 2-car family, both he and his wife worked, and they gave up one of their family cars to send me to a
Wow.
Christian high school because I was getting bullied at my high school. You
Wow.
can't negate that. That was wonderful. But I had the other side too. I had the prejudice as well. When I realized to go into Christian service, I had to go to college. Um, at that time, I was first in my family to go to college, and I had joined a Christian theater company who had embezzled some money that I gave them. So I was dismayed in my faith and hurt and shocked. But as I went to college, suddenly I had to discover there's another kind of love that normal human beings have to know, and that's romantic love too. And even though I was very careful and only dated Christians who were committed, I statistically fell into the trap of dating violent men.
Mm.
Emotionally violent first, and then they would go to cross that line and become physically violent. Now, praise God, I was able to get out of those relationships. But one night I was in this house, and it was a house of all committed Christians because I was a committed Christian. I was having nightmares and flashbacks of heavy breathing in my room. And because we were Christian girls, we thought it was demons and we tried to pray it away.
Mm.
But there was something inside of me. I was reading through Proverbs that said I needed counsel. And I started to see a very good counselor, realized they were memories. They were
Mm.
nothing to be frightened of. They were something I needed to incorporate. I'd never completely forgotten about the abuse, but I just didn't think it mattered. And learning to talk about it with a counselor, and then learning to become a speaker in it, and an advocate for other women was a great joy in my life.
Mm.
I ended up in a car accident in 1993 where my left leg was paralyzed and I almost died. And I had a minister at that time tell me I could not sue because he misquoted a scripture about suing. And I said, I believe that's about theology. It's not about civil matters. And I knew enough of the
Mm.
Bible to argue with him. He got incensed and pretty much was verbally abusive. But this time I had a little bit of empowerment to talk back to him.
Mm.
But I left that church, and at that time, because I almost died, I was studying to be a counselor. I said, Lord, I just really want to lead people to Christ. And I'm going to incorporate my story in leading people to Christ. And God opened the doors, and I've been preaching ever since.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So, can you share a little bit more about the the situation of the whole foster care um, system, I guess, and
Yeah.
like is there anything we can do besides prayer is very important if we know a child and praying. But yeah, could you enlighten us a little bit more about that?
Well, in the book, I made a foster parent who had really good intentions, but still fell horribly short. And I did that purposefully with her abuser too, who wanted to break the pattern but fell horribly short. One of the things you can do, even though I put this in the book, and please read my book so you can see how they did this, is I'd love people to be foster parents. I'd love Christians to be foster parents, not necessarily to win them to the Lord, because you may not do that. And then you can become duplicitous, but just to share a home and love with them. And yes, it is a lot to take on. And yes, they won't be television children saying yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. They got issues. Not all of them do. but we have a shortage of foster parents. And
mm.
recently there's been a lot of talk and about politics, about IVF and having your own baby. And I empathize with someone that wants to have their own child, but please hear me. If you can't have your own children, or if you have children, there's so many children already that need a home. There's so many children that need love, even your imperfect love. And I hope I showed that in the book, that imperfect love was better than no love at all.
Yeah, I think
Also is to
I
hear
was
other
just gonna
people's. Oh, go ahead, say
no,
it.
I'm sorry. I have another question. So you finish because it relates to what
Oh,
you're saying. Go ahead.
well, in the book too, she has an employer, and she also has some friends and teachers. I had my first employer at a preschool. So I had gotten out of foster care, but I was dealing the trauma with my abuse. And I had a teacher at a preschool in San Diego, and the preschool was called Prince of Peace Preschool. Her name was Judy. She was very patient with me with my PTSD.
Mm,
I'm very kind. Um, and you know, middle management, you may think that's a nowhere job, but middle management taking a lot of people who are learning to have their first job. And I think that good managers are angels from heaven. When you're teaching that 18, 19, or sometimes 16-year-old how to work, and this kid is trying, I'm not talking about slacker, someone who's really trying, but still messing up,
mm,
still not doing everything. They may not have good hygiene. They may at times be a little bit what appears thoughtless, but not attending well to what needs to be done. Coming alongside of them and helping them attend and encouraging them in their walk, that can be very helpful. And
mm,
there are more and more job training programs with different ministries like Amelia. Amaya is a ministry for women coming out of prostitution, where you can get candidates from these backgrounds and help train them. But
mm,
one of the Karen's thorn is that there's not one prayer or one easy answer, but she learns that, and everyone in the book is flawed, her youth leader, as well as um, her best friend, as well as her foster mom, but everyone tries, and everyone trying adds up to Carrie feeling a little bit safer in her world.
mm. Okay.
And that's a big thing, is learning to be kind, learning to be safe. But primarily, if you can take in a foster child, if you're recently retired and you have the patience to be with children and you're wondering, what can I do with my life? Take in a foster kid, take in two. Provide, and I know you, well, my child raising is over. Well, maybe you've got a blessing that you don't even know about waiting for you. Or if you're desperately trying to have a child and you feel a little bit, or you keep miscarrying and feel a little bit cursed by God because this is happening, take in a foster kid. Because who
Okay.
knows, maybe God's got a new door open for you.
I see your heart. That's awesome. I want to just ask you though. I think the hesitation a lot of people have probably is due to movies and media that stereotypes every foster kid has so many problems. They're a mess that if you take them in, they're going to steal from you, or they're just going to run away, or they're going to have anger issues, or they're going to just, you know, deplete your life. Can you speak into that? Because I'm guessing from what you're sharing here that these are stereotypes.
They are.
Yeah.
And the reality is they're not going to be perfect kids, but who has a perfect kid in this world? Um, a lot of kids like me, in spite of my sexual abuse, I had memorized a lot of the Bible. I was a little evangelist. I had trouble with cleanliness and hygiene because of my abuse. I had horrible dyslexia because of my abuse. But I was a good kid. My brothers and sisters were good kids. None of us got into trouble.
Mm,
In fact, most of us are professionals now. But we had a lot to overcome. So just like with your own kids have anger, yeah, there's going to be some anger issues. There's going to be some mistrust issues. If you have a good, if you're in foster care, you should have a recruiter that you talk to that's going to help you. You should get to know your social worker, see her as a friend, not as an enemy. One of the heartbreaking things is your job is to reunite them with their parents. And I won't lie, that's hard.
mm,
But the great joy is that you get to do something in a child's life. There was a poster that I saw when I had my little boy and little girl in my home. It says, 10 years ago, no one's going to remember what I said or did, what kind of car I drove, or what kind of clothes I wore, but I will be remembered for how I treated a child, because the
Mm,
child carries the memories with them.
okay.
And,
Yeah.
that is a great gift that God can give us, is to pass that on to kids. So many kids need grandparents, and um, they need parents, and they need someone who's going to come alongside of them and love them.
Is there
Um,
any kind of statistic about how long, a child will be able to stay with you? The feeling is, oh, I'm going to get so attached and they're just going to be ripped away. And
well, it's some children. I don't have. I won't try to make a statistic out. I don't know. I do know they told me, and I did it 10 years ago, that the average stay was 3 years.
okay.
And I kept my children for 2 years and a half. And then one aged out of the program and didn't want to live with me, although love her desperately still. And one of them, it was returned to his mother. So both those are realities. And also when you talked about toughness, some of my kids are kind of tough. We all know this is true. Just to say it out loud, is that we're all tougher than we think. We can handle a kid, even when they're swearing at us. And no one gave us this life to live perfect little lives. To love someone is to make yourself vulnerable to hurt. We tell our 14-year-old daughter that when she gets a crush and she's crying, he doesn't like me. We say, well, that's part of romance. If you love him, you're going to cry some, okay? But it's going to be good. And eventually you'll meet someone that won't make you cry as much as he does. This is life. Well, that kind of love, guess what? That happens with kids too. You're going to say something in the heat of anger that's going to, you didn't mean. I think as
Yeah.
Christians, we've got this great gift in Jesus Christ, in that we serve a God with scars. When Jesus rose from the dead, he could have had liposuction and plastic surgery and came back with nothing wrong with him. But instead, he kept the scars in his hands, almost to say, this is what sin does.
Yeah.
And I want you to see, and Thomas needed to see those scars for his healing. And
Yeah.
all of us have our scars, and we don't get out of this life without being used up a little. And having children with us helps us to pass on, to say, yeah, I've got this scar, but I've got this answer as well.
That's nice. Yeah. Can you take us back to, if you can remember, I know your trauma, but how old were you when you entered the foster care system? And can you remember what it was like when you first arrived to that family?
Well, we were like six. I have 9 brothers and sisters, and they wanted to keep us together, so they gave us to an older couple. So I was five.
9 of you. 9
Yeah,
of you.
9 of us.
They took 9 of you. That's amazing. Did they have a big house?
They had a big house, I think, provided by the government, but this is 1965, so
Okay.
things have changed, because
Okay.
they spanked, and we were frightened of it. In fact, they spanked my little sisters for peeing the bed, and they were very little. So it was pretty. It was a place where I appreciated it was clean. I appreciated it was well fed, because it wasn't clean and we weren't well fed at home. I remember appreciating that I had enough to eat. Um, and there was a place to play, and having my brothers and sisters around me. I remember that. But I remember there being no love whatsoever.
Mm,
And I may have indulged my foster kids a little bit because of that. I went to the opposite side.
okay.
But there needed to be affection. There needed to be a joke. There needed to be some kindness. And I think she had the attitude, like, I got to hold these kids in line because they're going to be mean. When sometimes kids are just kids, they need to be hugged and loved
Hmm.
and touched appropriately. And so that was, I think the nicest thing she said is that I looked like my mom, one day when I pulled my hair back. But other than that, it was a tough place for me.
Mm,
And I was homesick, but I didn't want to go home because of my environment. I think in today's world, we probably would have been taken out of the home. I think enough people called the police enough times, we would have been taken out of the home. But as it was, we survived. My mom, would come back to the Lord periodically, and when she did, our life would be good, and we'd see examples of how home should be in my aunts and uncles, and also in the church, which was a great gift to me.
mm, mm,
Um, One of the reasons I guess I still, I want to preach the gospel, but the reason why I chose to be a pastor as opposed to being a chaplain or to being a missionary is I love the family environment of a church. I love church potlucks. I love the idea that we can let our guards down and share with each other, and we strive to be the body of Christ with each other. We do not always succeed, and yes, we hurt each other and mess each other up, but we also lift each other up to God in Jesus Christ.
mm.
So, and I saw that as a kid to some extent.
Is there an age that, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter. Is there an age that it's a little easier on a kid to get into the foster care system, and an age that's harder, like teenagers? Or I don't mean for the parent, but for the child.
It's hard to say because I think it's difficult all around. In Carrie's Thorn, in this book here, Carrie's Thorn, um, I purposely presented a situation where Carrie's life was untenable, even though her mom took her to church. It was untenable. She could not have stayed in that home. But her life unravels when she goes into foster care because she feels like she betrayed everyone she loved.
Mm,
And I wanted to paint a realistic picture for the child that you just feel no matter what choice, and the government too, as they try to do this, because we don't want to put people down who try. Um, no matter what choice, it was going to be a bad one for this teenage girl.
mhm,
And her life was going to be harder. And if a forgotten door called home, her pastor Will was talking to another pastor, and he says it was going to be hard no matter where that little girl went, but you gave her love along the way. He's encouraging another pastor. And that's the earth thing we have here until we get to heaven. We don't get to erase anyone's problems. We don't get to erase their scars, but we get to
mhm,
love them along the way as we seek love in our own lives.
mhm. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we've had, I think, just one interview one time, but talking about taking in immigrant kids who are coming in. A friend of mine does this, and they're trying to locate a family member for them. So they need a transition family. So it's a pretty cool program where the they call you. That's the hard part. They'll call you and say, "Oh, you have two kids coming in 6 hours." It's kind of like that, and then you just have to be prepared at all times. And then they're never with you longer than 90 days, I believe. They
Mm.
always will locate a family member in that time. But yeah, this one family, they're in my church, and they're amazing. They are constantly taking in kids. And I've just watched over it's been a while now, 3, 4, 5 years, how much they've enjoyed it, how much they've grown. Their children are all, I believe they're all grown up, and so they're taking in kids. A lot of them speak Spanish, which my friends speak Spanish, which is nice. But it's just a beautiful thing, and they do a great job of just giving them wonderful food and lots of love, like you said, and lots of fun. They take them all around, get them to see things, and they're put in. There's a school. The organization has a school for these kids too, that right away helps them deal with the transition into our country, and language things, basic language, and emotional things. They have a counselor on staff. So that's an option too. That's a shorter
Yeah.
term foster care system in a
And
way.
and sometimes you'll have kids just like that too, especially kids who were taken out of home because they were houseless. and it wasn't safe where they were at until mom finds a place to stay.
Mm,
I think we can love people where they're at and realize what they're going through. I think one of the pictures I would say from my book though is I think you'll learn more about it, what's it like from the child's perspective.
yeah.
And that's what I wanted people to see as opposed from the adult's perspective. And I have memories of people to this day I carry with me. There was a book in the 70s and it's out of print, but it's called Seven Interactions. And it was a book that said that if a child that comes from a really unstable background, if they have 7 positive interactions with adults during their
Mm,
adolescence and childhood, they're more likely to ascend into the middle class and stay out of the penal system, out of the criminal system. And, it's amazing how much, just interacting with children well and being kind to them can
yeah.
do. And
And
volunteering to be appropriate mentors with kids can do.
and a lot of these programs, they're helping to fund it, correct?
Yes, yes, they are. Yeah.
Yeah, which can be a problem if somebody's taking that on just for the money,
Well,
right?
it's not a lot of money. So I
Okay.
don't recommend that you do it for that. You end up spending more of your money anyway.
Okay.
So it's not a lot of money. And it needs, I think your average middle class family needs a little help when they take in a kid and to make sure that kid is clothed well. And
Okay.
um such as you with in most states you get $100 for their clothing. So you got an adolescent kid who has 2 outfits. Well, how far is
Yeah.
$100 is going to go? You
Yeah.
know? So you're
Yeah.
going to end up spending more than $100 when you take them out. Most people are.
Okay.
And so it's not a lot of money, but it's enough money, and your grocery bill, of course, is going to triple, especially if you got teenagers, because every calorie they need,
Right. Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're
Of course.
skirting all over the place, and they're wonderful to have around. But for me, it was more of a blessing than a curse. It was financially stressful because I am a pastor and I don't make a lot of money to begin with.
Yeah. So you have in your book, you're displaying some of the uh, feelings that a child feels getting into the foster care system. You shared some of what you've felt. Um, are there other things that are common that a lot of care kids go through when they get into the foster care system?
Well, I talk about in the book PTSD. So I gave Carrie a boyfriend, and I made it a very innocent relationship, but she still got some PTSD from her father's molestation of her. Um, I talked about how kids from the best homes can get stuck into bullying situations. And in some group homes, bullying's a reality. And even in the best families where the kids are angels, bullying's a reality, mocking's a reality.
Okay.
And giving them the tools to stand up for themselves is one of the things I wanted to talk about. I also wanted to talk about the tremendous pressure there is on Christian women, especially, and I know it's on Christian men, but especially Christian women, to define forgiveness as denial. We get beaten up with the word forgiveness a lot. And the worst thing a Christian woman can be is embittered. When
Mm,
indeed, when we look in the Bible, um, we find a lot of people, Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel, had this righteous anger. And Isaiah once cries out in the middle of the street, "How dare you sell the poor for a pair of sandals?" He's angry because they're not doing the right thing. They're not being kind. I'm going to define the difference between anger and denial, because in the book, Carrie Thorne comes up against this teaching that she should just forgive and forget.
mm,
In other words, just let it happen. And then if she forgives, then she won't be in pain anymore.
mm,
And so in my story, I write that Carrie has this argument with a bunch of clergy people over it, and she's kind of shy to begin with, so it's not an easy scene. It's a painful scene for her. But I'm going to define to your listeners the difference between forgiveness and denial, just in case they meet a survivor of abuse. Most survivors don't have to work on forgiveness, regardless what you've heard. They need to work on self-protection. That's one of the reasons why survivors of incest and rape and child abuse go on to marry batterers, because we know how to forgive. We know how to overlook when he's angry at us. In fact,
Mm,
we can hardly tell when it happens because that's normal for us.
mm,
And we put up with too much nonsense. So if you're sitting on a bus late at night and you come from a regular family and someone gets in your face, you immediately push back like, get out of my face, or you get up and move because you have that anger inside of you to protect yourself. It's been put in you by your parents who from the very early age protected you. And so you knew to protect this body of yours.
mm,
You grew up in a home where you were constantly violated. You don't have that necessarily. You don't see the signs of someone trying to abuse you.
mm,
So, for forgiveness to happen, according to the scriptures, Christianity has this wonderful gift called confession and contrition. Confession is when you say, I admit I did something wrong, and contrition is when we say, I'm sorry for it. In order for forgiveness to happen, you must first admit that someone did something wrong to you, something they could have helped. Not that they did the best they could, because they could have done better. Not that well, they were abused too, so they had no choice but to abuse me.
mm,
Nope, they had other choices. But what they did was wrong and outrageous. And with that feeling that what they did was wrong and outrageous comes this self-preserving righteous anger. How dare they do that? Now, that righteous anger is good for you because if you're related to that person, chances are you're going to have children and you need that anger to protect your children and your grandchildren from that person.
right.
Because once a pedophile, if they're not repentant, always a pedophile. Forgiveness happens when you give that anger to God and say, help me to manage it and stop trying to fix them and stop trying to control them. So you say, God, they belong to you. I'm not going to be in this trap of us yelling at each other.
Mhm,
That's done, that's over. Denial says what happened to me was not that bad, or it happens to a
mm,
lot of person, or even worse, that it was deserved. Denial puts full responsibility on the survivor, saying, well, maybe I dressed wrong, or maybe I wore bad things. And maybe I could have been more loving afterwards. Denial says I have to take care of my abuser, so I'm praying for him day and night for his salvation. And denial hushes the voice of caution because denial refuses to allow yourself to be angry.
mm,
And if you don't believe this is in Christian circles, I recently, when I was in Indiana, got kicked out of a women's retreat because I was espousing righteous anger, where the speakers and many of the women were saying, you have to honor your husband no matter what, which they
mm,
were essentially saying a man can abuse you and you honor them. And I was
mm,
saying, if you look into the Greek word of honor, it means give them the respect that is due. Now, my father was a pedophile. The respect that is due to a pedophile is to keep him away from children and to keep him away from me. That's
mhm.
honoring my father.
Yeah.
My mother suffers from depression and can sometimes lash out in an angry way. Honoring my mother is keeping her at an arm's distance. So at a celebration, she's not right next to me to say something cruel to me to hurt me. I'm honoring her because sometimes she was a good mom. And sometimes I love her. Sometimes she was horrible. And I need to realize that's who she is.
Mhm,
So it's learning to nurture this righteous anger in your life. That's what I tried to put in Carrie's thorn. And Carrie has a friend named Laloni. Laloni's a little bit better at standing up for herself than Carrie is, but both of them are trying to learn how to stand up for themselves. In the second book, A Forgotten Door Called Home, they're reunited with their folks, Carrie with her mother and Laloni with her aunts. And this is again about well-meaning adults trying to change, but not really changing. And I kept a theme in the book that they still needed to learn to take care of themselves. And that was something that God had given them.
mm,
Because Christians are so beaten up with, I need to be a doormat and let people walk on me. And I don't think that's what Jesus wanted
mm,
his disciples to be. In fact, in the book of Matthew, there's one time when they want to make Jesus a king. And And Jesus looks out at the crowd and he slips away. And Matthew says in the gospel, for he did not trust them, for he knew the hearts of men.
Mm,
In other words, Jesus reserved the right to say, I'm not going to trust you. But more often than once, I've heard Christian counselors, and I mean non-trained Christian counselors in a church, and Christian women talk about you just have to will yourself to trust them no matter what.
mm,
No,
no.
you don't have to trust anyone. You have to trust God, and you have to be wise in your relationships.
Yeah, this is good. It's a lot in the area of boundaries that we brought up at different times. So I appreciate you getting into that. But we're running out of time, and I just want you to tell us again the names of your books and just in just 2 minute highlight of the Dickens one, what that's about as well.
Okay, Hearing the Gospel through Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol. And my website is dickensinchristianity.com, also revcherylkincaid.com. And this is available primarily with the publisher who's in the UK. You can get it cheaper there than on Amazon. But it's a book that correlates the lessons of Advent with the four spirits that visits Ebenezer. Ebenezer in Hebrew means the Lord has brought me thus far. Dickens named him that on purpose. So
Mm.
there's that book. And then Carrie's Thorn is the story about a Christian girl in foster care, and about how the lessons she learns. And A Forgotten Door Called Home is about Carrie and Laloni as young women trying to make their own homes, not knowing how to do it, and also trying to make boundaries for themselves. And the other one is The Little Clay Pot. This is
Oh,
based on Jeremiah chapter 18, about when the clay falls apart in the potter's hand and he has to make something better. This is a lesson for both adults and children. And The Little Candle That Was Frightened of the Dark is a story about the Advent wreath, and there's one candle who's a memorial candle who's frightened of the dark, and the other candles walk him through the Advent story so he doesn't have to be frightened of the dark. I have another one coming out in October called Please Don't Move My Grandma's Chair. It's about a little girl who's trying to stop her dad from throwing away grandma's chair after grandma passes. And it's about grief, and it's about the hope of heaven, and about letting go. And like I said, all of them are found on Rev without a dot. So just Rev Cheryl Kincaid as one word, .com. You can go ahead and Google Rev Cheryl's books, and you should reach my website.
that's awesome. Okay, well, we'll have all that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Cheryl, just for opening our eyes a little bit more to what kids go through in the foster care system or who coming out of abuse. I appreciate your vulnerability and that you've written these books. That's awesome. I hope that that really encourages a lot of people. So you all have a great week, and we're looking forward to having you back again next week.